Okay, so I think I'm live. I am just going to wait a few minutes till I can see that I've got some viewers. Okay. I'm going to drink my tea because I'm actually quite nervous. And it'll give me something to do while I'm waiting. This is Baxter behind me. Okay, he is my muse, I suppose, for today's live. Um, he's special, very special in lots and lots of different ways. And one in particular, his just his general sort of very lively, very boisterous personality, I suppose. Although actually you wouldn't think that now because he is now 11. And you have mellowed with age, haven't you? Okay, so I'll just wait a couple more minutes and then I will get started. I'm just going to check actually that I'm able to see the chat because I can't see it on my laptop, but I'm hoping that I will be able to see it in the group and then yay, brilliant. I can actually see any questions now that anybody wants to ask, which is great. So I was going to start with introducing myself. So my name is Emma Stoker. I live in Newtown in Mid Wales. I run my own business, Puppy Plus Training and Behaviour Services. I've been doing that since 2013. 2013, I set up. I have a BA in education. I taught in primary schools for 20 years. And then I had Baxter. Okay, and Baxter kind of turned everything on its head. And I decided that I was going to retrain. So I then did my degree in canine behaviour and training alongside teaching, because I was teaching part-time at that point. Then I started my business and the rest is history. I'm hoping that Baxter is going to lie down in a minute and isn't just going to continually wander up and down behind me because I'm finding him awfully distracting. You're going to lie down? He says, no, I'm just going to climb on you. Okay. So I thought to start with, I actually had quite a lot of difficulty deciding what I was going to call this live. I looked at words that I could use to kind of describe the behaviour that I was seeing from Baxter, so that when people looked at the description of what I was going to talk about, they would know what kind of dogs is it that I'm aiming this live about. So I thought the title, He Just Wants to Say Hello, was very apt, because that's basically what he did want to do all the time. And then I looked at other words. So I looked at, and it actually made me think quite a lot what kind of connotation we have with these words. So I chose the words boisterous because when I actually looked at the definition of boisterous, I got noisy, lively, full of energy, cheerful, and full of life, which I think describe Baxter's personality pretty aptly. Impulsive, okay, acting without forethought, and then basically super sociable. So everything for Baxter is very motivating. Everything in the environment was very motivating. He wanted to interact and receive attention from people, from other dogs. All of those things were very valuable for him. Okay. Just a little bit more about me before I carry on any further. I have a little bit of a problem with word retrieval. So sometimes I can be in the middle of sentences and forget what I'm trying to talk about. So if I pause, if I say words that don't quite match context. I think I'm slightly dyslexic, and I think that is what causes the problem. It does cause much amusement for the people who train with me on a regular basis. I once told an owner that her dog had lovely tassels, when in fact I meant that her dogs had a lovely feathering. So it's a little bit of an issue. Okay, so I'm just going to keep scrolling down. So let's start talking about a little bit about Baxter's history and why I chose to talk about Baxter in my life. Okay. So when I had Baxter, I was a relatively inexperienced pet owner. I'd owned a black Labrador before Baxter. The black Labrador was nothing like Baxter in the slightest. Um, I had Baxter at 8 weeks old. He was bought from what I would describe as perhaps a commercial breeding establishment. So they did all the health testing. The dogs were very well cared for, but I don't think the puppies perhaps received as much attention as there potentially is for a young litter of puppies. Um, at 12 weeks old, I decided that I was going to start training him. I'd never really trained a dog before. I decided I was going to start training him, and I took him to one-to-one puppy classes. Okay, actually one-to-one puppy sessions. Okay, so it was just me and Baxter. He did well. It was all positive reinforcement, all clicker training. He enjoyed the training. The trainer, I would say, was had a slight negative bias towards him. He was chocolate, so immediately that, I think, formed a judgment in her mind about what his behaviour would be like. He did actually fulfil that later, but at the time, it was quite clear that there was a judgment made on him. So he was chocolate, he was showbread, and therefore his potential was perhaps not as great as it would have been if he were different colour, a different breed. So I completed that course with him. I think at that point he was, sort of fairly well trained. At that point, my focus purely was on having a well-behaved dog. Okay, so teaching behaviours: sit, down, stand, having a dog that walked nicely on a lead. And that's what I was focusing on at that point. So I then put him into a class environment. That was a little bit of a shock because he found that environment difficult. But I didn't realise at the time, I suppose, how difficult that environment was for him. I just thought he was misbehaving. Okay. So I taught him all these lovely behaviours that I thought he should perform wherever he was. And he couldn't do that. Okay. So I thought, right, I'm just going to have to train him better. Okay. It's a training issue. I have to train him better. I have to spend more time training him. And so that's what I did. Okay. I trained and trained and trained. He struggled in the class environment. So what behaviours was he displaying in the classroom environment? He would get very, very excited around the other dogs. He would whine to get to them. We ended up sitting at the other end of the village hall compared to everybody else because he just couldn't be around or next to the other dogs. It wasn't a relaxing experience. I was continually working on his eye contact with me. Again, training. Okay, so these were all operant behaviours. Could I train him to look at me in this environment? Could I train him to lie down, sit, stand? I wasn't really thinking about the emotional part of his behaviour. I was just thinking about how I could improve his behaviour around other people. I was embarrassed. Okay. And I would look at everybody else's dogs who were behaving quite appropriately. And then I would look at this chocolate Labrador that was on the end of my lead. and I would think, why can't he behave like other dogs? His social skills at this point were quite poor, I would say. So his agenda was purely what he wanted to get out of that interaction. So he would approach other dogs in a very enthusiastic manner. He would, there was none of that polite kind of, avoiding eye contact. He would give them far too much eye contact. His head would be very high. His tail carriage would be very high. He would sniff the dogs briefly on their head and or head, ears, around their mouth, and then he would move around to their rear end. And he was incredibly rude. He was push his nose up the bottom almost of the other dogs when he was sniffing them to find out information. He was just the epitome of what you would call a dog that has very limited social skills. And at this point, I didn't really realise that that wasn't normal. Well, I did realise it wasn't normal, but I didn't realise the impact that his behaviour, I suppose, was having on the other dogs. Okay. And the trainer in that group, she kind of pointed that out, that his behaviour was from lack of socialisation. So all of his behaviour was because I hadn't socialised him enough. Okay, so that was the information that I was given. And with that information, because that information wasn't, how can I put this? It was quite brief. Shouldn't go into any further detail about how I was to go about socializing this dog, but his behavior was due to lack of socialization, and therefore he needed socializing. Okay, all of his problems were because he wasn't socialized enough. Okay. So then I thought, right, well, so I have to put him into lots of environments where there are other dogs. Okay. At this point, that probably everybody watching is shaking their head. But what I wanted to do with this live was explain to you what people who own these types of dogs and are not making the best decision for those dogs. Sometimes they're doing it with the information that they have, and they're doing it with the best of intentions. It's just not great. Okay, what they're doing isn't great. And what I was doing was definitely not great. Okay, so I enrolled Baxter in some gun dog classes, quite traditional gun dog classes. So using fairly traditional methods. I was really enjoying my clicker training at this point. So I went into the gun dog group with my treat bag and my clicker and my treats. So not only did I stand out because I was the only one in the group with a rather large boisterous chocolate showbred Labrador, I also had a treat bag and lots of sausages. Okay, so immediately I was a little bit different. We got noticed, I think it's fair to say. Baxter made progress in that group, but limited progress really for the amount of time that we were in the group. It wasn't great for him. He practiced being rude around other dogs, practiced being feeling frustrated around other dogs. By this point, I was reading more. Okay, so I've chosen a few books actually that I read at the very beginning, and they're kind of what changed my perception of what Baxter was doing. Okay, so up until this point, I had very much worked on my managing Baxter's behaviour. Okay, and as you can see, he's not great at making decisions for himself. Bax, come here, bud. I know you want to coach, but I'm talking. So he finds it difficult to know what to do without humans telling him what to do, and that's not a reflection of his intelligence. It's a reflection of what I taught him at the very beginning. So I didn't really teach him any life skills per se. I taught him to follow my instruction. Okay, so he became very, oh, well, I suppose he became very operant. I taught him lots of behaviours on cue, but without me um, asking him to do those behaviours, he wasn't very good at making any of those decisions for himself. Okay, so the first book that I read that kind of gave me a bit more of an idea and actually made me think about what emotional state Baxter was in when he was in these environments that he wasn't particularly coping very well in, was this book here. Okay, so I should also point out that I was doing a little bit of showing with Baxter at this point as well. Okay, it's just something that I'd wanted to do with him. I wanted to do everything with him. Okay, which I think is what kind of added to the pressure of me putting pressure on myself, I suppose, to have a dog that was able to cope socially in a range of different situations. So this book, I started to realise actually some of the behaviours that Baxter was displaying when he was in those group environments were because he actually wasn't coping very well. He wasn't coping very well with feeling frustrated. He wasn't coping very well with not being able to access and going and saying hello to the other dogs. I didn't really have any kind of structure in place as to what kind of other dogs Baxter was greeting. I let him greet any dogs really that the owners were happy for him to greet. Okay. And sometimes he got to greet, sometimes he didn't. He didn't really know what was going to happen in those environments. So I think there was always a lot of anticipation because he didn't know what was going to happen. Okay. I started reading. So I started reading. I think I'd started my degree in the September of that year. So that obviously gave me a lot more information. So I was also told kind of like during all of this process of trying to work with Baxter that his behavior was because he was being dominant. It was actually a vet that told me he was being dominant. He was actually I'll never forget this moment because I was sitting in on a chair on the in the consulting room. Baxter was trying to climb into my lap to get the treats off the table that were on the corner of the table, and she told me that he was being dominant because he was climbing on me and obviously wasn't behaving as he was supposed to behave. Okay, and I remember thinking at that moment, no, he's just trying to get the treats off the table. Okay, and even to this moment now, it makes me smile. So again, going back to dog owners who come to us looking for advice and help with these dogs, what we've got to remember is they will be receiving an advice and help from lots of other sources as well as from us. And sometimes I think it's very difficult to owners to be able to whittle out and decide which of that advice is relevant, which of that advice they need. And also what they should be doing about that advice. So being told that Baxter needed socialization, but then not necessarily being given any more information about that. I mean, what I did was immersed him in everything. So I enrolled him in gun dog classes. I take him down the park as much as I could because I thought the more interaction he has with other dogs, surely the better his behavior is going to get. Okay. That didn't happen, surprisingly. And actually, his behavior worsened. He became, he found that environment, the going to the park and having that anticipation of being let off lead to go and say hello to all of the other dogs that were in the park was hugely motivating for him. And I don't believe, looking back on his behaviour and actually looking at it from an emotional point of view, that there was a huge amount of anxiety involved in any of the behaviour that he was showing. Um, his motivation for interacting and saying hello to those dogs was purely it was socially motivated, and it wasn't because he was worried in any way, I don't think, about the way that they were going to react towards him, which I think is different to many other Labradors or any other breeds of dogs that I see who behave in a similar way. So the books that I was reading kind of really made me think, actually the reason he's behaving is in this way is not because he is not well trained, because at this point he was quite well trained. He's probably actually better trained than any of the other dogs that I own, because I had to work at that level with him. Okay. So I actually started to realise that the behaviours that he was doing weren't because he wasn't very well trained. They were because he didn't cope very well around other people and around other dogs. Or he didn't cope very well with not being able to access those people and other dogs. So he had a lot of frustration when he was on lead. Um, he he showed a lot of kind of stress behaviours, I suppose, when he was on lead. But I'm almost certain that they were appearing because he couldn't access the things that he'd wanted to access. Um, his interactions with other dogs did deteriorate at this point, because now with the addition of hormones, he became more rude and intrusive in his greeting behaviour of other dogs. And if other dogs reacted to him, he would react back. Okay. So he would go in almost in a way that was offensive. Okay. And it was this point when I thought, right, none of this is working. None of these things that I'm doing are working. And I need to step back from all of this, and I need to have a totally new plan for what I was going to do. Okay. So I went to another trainer, and I spent an hour with her talking. Actually, the session didn't involve Baxter at all. He just sort of bimbled around in the field, okay, while we talked. And we devised a completely new plan for integrating him back into society. Okay. So I took him out of all those situations that I'd previously immersed him into. Okay. So his behavior was a form of reactivity. It wasn't motivated by fear. Okay. It wasn't because he was frightened of the other dogs. It wasn't because he wanted to get the other dogs so that he would feel relief. I don't think. He was purely motivated by wanting to say hello to those other dogs. Okay. And I believe that a lot of his stress behaviors, again, was because he couldn't access what he wanted. Okay. And all of the training that I had done with him, so what I started to do was work on teaching him, I guess, kind of more operant behaviors. Okay. So I taught him. I was reading Control Unleashed at this point, which was absolutely fantastic again, and I kind of utilised a lot of the things that were in there. So I worked on teaching him to look at me. I worked on attention to name. I worked on teaching him to look at me. I worked on look at that. So teaching him to look over at other dogs and to disengage from looking over at other dogs. I worked a lot on Find It game. So I worked a lot on using foods and then kind of tapping into his olfactory senses to lower his arousal levels. All of those things worked. Okay. But again, I think I was very focused on working him closer to other dogs than I necessarily needed to. Okay, at that point. So I was very focused on, again, I was very focused on I want him to behave appropriately around other dogs. Okay, so looking back on it on what I did with him, I think I overshadowed. I think the food and the training overshadowed a lot of his behavior when he was in a close proximity to other dogs. So he looked like he was coping really well. He was giving me nice attention. He was responding to my cues. Um, he looked like he was behaving well. But as soon as I stopped that, as soon as I maybe withhold health treats a little bit longer, um, then his behavior would revert back to his previous behavior. So I was very much managing the situation with the training that I had done. And, don't get me wrong, it worked. Okay. I had a dog that I could, that looked well behaved in those environments. But he wasn't making those decisions for himself. He wasn't coping, I don't think, necessarily any better than he was doing previously. I just taught him, I was managing the majority of his behavior. Okay. So I then attended a Grisha Stewart's seminar on behavioural adjustment training, and this was kind of like a game changer for me. So I then started thinking again more about the emotional side of Baxter's behaviour, but also about more about his emotional well-being rather than what I wanted from the relationship that I had with him. Okay, and I'm not ashamed to say that now because that's what that's what I think owners do. Okay, and it takes time for them to develop that empathy and understanding in how their dog is feeling in those environments. Okay, um, so the lead handling. So I completely changed how I was handling Baxter's lead. I went back even further in terms of my training and worked a lot at a distance to the other dogs. And I started to really think about how Baxter was feeling in all of this. I tried to remove more of the food because the food had become, they were rewards for the behavior that Baxter was doing, but they were all rewards for behavior that I was cueing. They weren't rewards for behavior that Baxter was choosing. And it was all very high arousal. When he was doing look at me, when he was when he was doing his look at that, so he was looking at the other dogs and I was rewarding that. Um, they were all behaviors that were performed in a high arousal state. He wasn't any calmer than he had been when he was reactive, but he was just more focused on me. Okay. So what the behavioral adjustment training did, and again, I did this predominantly by myself because there were not trainers in my local area that I could work with at that time that were working on this kind of thing. Okay. I live in rural mid Wales and there or maybe there were trainers here that could have worked with me on those things, but I wasn't aware of them at that time. Okay. So with Baxter, I brought a long line and I worked on behaviours. So lead handling. So I worked on things like the slow stop. That was a game changer for me. So because I tried to work on taking as much tension out of the lead as I possibly could. Okay. So that was a game changer for me with working with Baxter. I learned to get his attention without necessarily cueing it all the time, or perhaps it was cueing it in a less um pressurized way. So I think the training that I was doing with Baxter when I was working on look at me, look at that, go find food, um, they were all very busy behaviors. So when I started removing the food and changing my expectation of Baxter, and also changing what that meant to him, okay, he began to calm down. So he started sniffing more, he started engaging more with the environment. Um, the dogs became less important to him because he just started to relax. Okay. If anybody's got any questions about this, but oh, by the way, um, please add them in. I'm kind of talking at a rate of knots. Um, Partially because I want to fit everything in, and partially because I'm quite nervous. So any questions, please add them into the comments, because I will just answer those at the end. Okay, or if they're relevant during the the live, I will answer them kind of in between as well. So leash handling, yeah, that was a big game changer for me and Baxter. I also started doing more problem solving things with him. So letting him choose behaviours rather than me prescripting what behaviours I wanted to do with him. Um, he was incredibly impulsive, and I don't think I taught him really kind of like not to be impulsive. I taught him that I was going to control his impulsiveness, but I don't think I taught him how to manage his own impulsiveness. So that was something that I have changed now, you'll be glad to say, with my current dog. So I have 4 dogs at the moment. Baxter is my eldest at 11. I have a working bred Springer Spaniel. I also have a black Labrador who is also showbred, who is 4, and I have a chocolate Labrador puppy who is 1. I had to keep another chocolate. Okay. Right, so going back to what I was looking at. Okay. I feel actually, so going back to how I've changed my behaviors now, um, with Baxter, I was reluctant to neuter him. I really did not want to neuter him. Okay. Um, I I was doing a little bit of showing with him, so I was enjoying doing that. I only went to outdoor shows where there were lots and lots of space, and I kind of entered the shows that I knew he would be able to cope in. Okay. Um, he was, and I didn't want to neuter him before I knew how much of an effect the training I was doing with him would have on him. Okay. So he got to 3.5, and although I'd worked on the behavioural adjustment training by this point, he was coping a lot better. I think his emotional state was much better. However, I could never kind of crack how aroused he was in the presence of the scent of other dogs. Okay. So, you know, the thing that male Labradors do when they're sniffing, smelling the scent of a female, so the teeth chattering. Um, that was apparent whenever we went anywhere, and there was profuse amounts of saliva. He was hugely aroused by the smell of other dogs, the presence of other dogs. And I waited till he was 3.5, to see whether maturity, the training that I had done with him would affect that behavior. Um, it didn't. Okay. So at 3.5, I decided that I was going to neuter him. Okay. So not a decision that I made lightly. What do I do with my clients now, in this kind of situation? I provide them with it is delightful, Gemma. Yeah, very delightful. So, I give my clients the information. Okay, so I give them the information, and then I let them choose what they think is appropriate for their dog. I am not pro nor anti neutering. I base any advice that I give on that dog and that situation. Okay. In Baxter's case, it was the right thing to do for him. Okay. Um, when he was entire, I had been relatively low on his list of priorities. So the top of his priority list was looking for dogs, looking for lady dogs in particular. In fact, actually, he didn't really mind whether they were lady dogs or male dogs. They were a dog, therefore they were worthy of his attention. Um, he was quite delightful. Um, he I was relatively low down, like I said, on his list of priorities. Okay. After neutering, all the training that I had done while he was entire came to the forefront of the behaviours that I was seeing. So whereas before I would take him to a new environment and it would take me a while to get him engaged and for him to be able to concentrate and work with me, that reduced significantly because he actually just became disinterested in the smell of other dogs. Um, he wasn't trying. He still has got to. Don't get me wrong. He's not perfect. He still has some residual behaviours of what he used to be like in his early days. He's still very interested in other dogs, but not for those same reasons. Okay, so neutering for him at that time was the right thing to do. Okay. Um, if he had shown any signs of being anxious around other dogs, it would have been much harder to make that decision. But because he didn't really show any kinds of anxiety around other dogs, um, he was full on, I suppose, was his behaviour around other dogs. Okay, and I really do not think it was motivated in any way because after neutering, there was no change in his his outgoing personality, shall we say. There was no change in any of that. Okay. Um, what have I learned from all of these experiences? Okay. So I've learned don't judge people. That's my biggest kind of part of this live, I suppose, is owners are very often owners are doing their best with the information that they've been given, just like I was. Um, when I look back on it, I kind of I shake my head at my own behaviour. Okay, and I feel as if I have to apologise to every dog owner that I see now that has a dog that's slightly fearful or has been affected by dogs like Baxter because at that point, when I was working on socializing Baxter, I was completely unaware of the effect that his behavior was having on other dogs. Um, I I didn't have great empathy with Baxter, but I also didn't have great empathy with how other owners and other dogs were feeling, and it wasn't born out of um me not caring. It was born out of just a lack of lack of knowledge. Okay. So what do we need to do for owners with these types of dogs? We need to help them. Okay. And if we think that their dog's behavior is a result of lack of socialization, which I'm still not convinced that Baxter's behaviour was as a result of that. We need to teach them what to do. We need to um, be not just teaching them, but showing them what they need to do. So with my clients, I work a lot on practical skills, lead handling skills. It's probably one of the first things that I do with clients with dogs that are like Baxter. So yes, I teach them to teach their dogs operant behaviours, I suppose, on cue that will help them manage their dogs, like I did with Baxter. But I also work a lot on teaching owners how to handle their leads in a way that does not make the problem worse. Okay. I talk about distance. I don't think that many pet owners actually understand the distances involved with working with dogs like Baxter. Um, I thought I was giving him space, but actually I wasn't, because he needed a lot more space than I was actually giving him. Okay. Um, how have I changed what I do with my dogs now? Okay. So what have I learned from this, and what do I now teach dogs that are similar to Baxter? Okay. So I love showbred Labradors. I like their outlook on life. I like they're always happy. Okay, they have great resilience. They bounce back from experiences that were aversive. They make great stooge dogs, not Baxter. Okay, but my other black Labrador that I have, Prue, who's 4, she's a great stooge dog. Her mother before her was a great stooge dog. Um, when these dogs have appropriate skills, they are fantastic. Okay. But we need to think quite carefully about how we're teaching these appropriate skills. We also need to be mindful of how inappropriate social skills can develop as well. Okay. So my I'm going to call her my puppy. She's not really a puppy anymore. She's 12 months old. Um, she is a lockdown puppy. So I bred her. I bred the litter when I made the decision to breed the litter. There was no pandemic. Okay. Sula was actually 1 yesterday, so she was born right at the beginning of the first lockdown. Okay. So, and I kept her because she was chocolate, because I wanted to see, is there really a difference? And I know there is research out there comparing the difference between different colours in Labradors. I wanted to keep a chocolate. Okay, so she is my social butterfly. Okay, so she is very motivated again by people. She's very motivated by other dogs. Um, I have been quite careful in terms of how I socialise her. So she has had lots of visual access to people and other dogs. When she was a puppy, I would combine my weekly trip to Tesco's with a bit of puppy socialisation. So I would take her with me to Tesco's, um, and we would walk around the car park and just watch all of the people. So not jumping all over the people, we would just watch them from a distance. Um, we I did the same with her with other dogs, I guess, in my with my one-to-one training sessions. So she greeted some dogs briefly. She didn't greet every dog that she met. I also worked on giving her lots of calm interaction with other dogs. I didn't seek out other people with puppies and let her play with the other puppies. okay, because she would have learned that jumping all over and bouncing all over the other dogs is fun. She would, because of her personality, she's quite pushy. Um, Not everybody likes that. I like that, but it just is something that I need to manage and make sure that I am not making that pushy behavior worse. Um, so I provided for her lots she saw lots of other dogs, she saw lots of people, or as many as you can do when you're in a pandemic, but she didn't get to interact with all of them. So I did lots of watching. We did lots of people watching, okay, and working on lead handling. So trying to keep my lead as loose as possible, slow stopping her if she was going to charge over to other people or other dogs. Um, I think she's kind of like starting to come out of adolescence now. So she's starting to pay a little bit. She went through a stage of not really paying as much attention as she'd done when she was a puppy. Again, quite normal. Not worried about that. Um, I have, when I was working on introducing new environments to Sula, the puppy, I place an emphasis on her emotional well-being in those environments rather than her ability to follow my cues or my instructions. So we did lots of people watching. We did lots of watching with no expectation. So I didn't really mind what she did. Did she lie down to watch? Did she want to stand and wag her tail while she was watching? I didn't really mind what she did. As long as she was happy and comfortable and not worried. Um, I very much kind of like now, I suppose, I have allowed my dogs personal choice in terms of whether they want to work with me or not in different environments. So I've rewarded and trained attention, but without a cue. So if the dog if the dog chooses to look at me, I will reward that behaviour. Not always. It may be a verbal kind of good girl. It may be a marker word followed by a food reward. Um, I very much kind of let her choose whether she wants to engage with me in those different environments. So I've removed a lot of the pressure that I put on Baxter when he was young. Okay. I I still think that the find it game or putting food on the floor in terms of lowering arousal levels is I do that a lot with my dogs. Okay. Um and I do that a lot in new environments. So perhaps if Sula was finding a new environment difficult, i.e., she was bouncing around and vocalizing, whining maybe because she wanted to go and explore and she couldn't. Sorry, that was my cat climbing in through the window. Um, I've totally lost my train of thought now. Look at these two behind me. Sorry. Thank you for totally spoiling my train of thought. Right, I'm going to try and go back to concentrating on what I was doing. Otherwise, I may I may remove the cat. Okay, so when I take Sula to a new environment, the first thing I would do is I would pop a little bit of food on the floor for her. I would see if she would take the food, see if she was comfortable enough to take the food. Then I would work on, can she take food from my hand? Does she want to look at me? And I would use that as an assessment, I suppose, on how comfortable she was in that environment. Were her arousal levels low enough that she could engage with me out of choice rather than because I was asking her to engage with me and interact with me? Um, I think another big shift, I suppose, in how I work with my dogs is other people's opinion when I first started training, other people's opinion of me and my dog used to matter to me a lot. Okay. And I think one of the reasons I put so much pressure on Baxter to learn certain behaviors and behave socially appropriately was because I was concerned about what other people would think of me. Um, I generally don't have so much of that concern anymore. I'm a trainer and a behaviorist, so obviously there's a level of pressure that I feel to have dogs that aren't I'm trying to think of a site. Oh, I'm just going to go with layman's terms, okay? So a dog that's not behaving like an idiot. But obviously there's certain amount of social pressure on me to have a dog that is behaving in a socially appropriate manner. But I feel a lot less of that, and my dog's um emotional state of mind, how comfortable my dog is. They're still going in the background, these two. My dog's emotional state of mind, how comfortable he is, how happy he is, all of those things now are far more important to me than what other people perceive my dog's behavior to be like. Okay, goodness me, I can't believe I've talked for nearly a whole hour. I didn't really think that this would be difficult, but that surprised me how quickly that time has gone. I'm just going to just see if there's anything particular that I had meant to mention and I didn't. So socialization for Sula has kind of been, I wrote down 3 words. So observing things, smelling things. So letting her use her olfactory senses, and for her to learn that those things that she thinks are really, really exciting are just part of the environment. So people are just part of the environment. Dogs are just part of the environment. Um, they don't need her to behave any differently towards them than anything else in the environment. Okay, I think just going back very briefly to the work and the impact that the behavioural adjustment training had on me, I also realised that at that point I was doing a lot of things subconsciously with Baxter. So whenever I saw another dog, and we've all, I think probably a lot of people in this group will have experienced the same thing. We see another dog or we see a person, whatever the stimulus for our dog's behaviour is, we see those things and we change. My breathing would alter, my body would produce cortisol, my behavior would change. Okay, so with Sula, I have really worked on, and I think because I'm calmer, because I don't feel that social pressure on that, I don't have that social pressure on myself anymore. I think I don't then put that pressure onto Sula to behave in a certain way either. Okay. Um, I think that's everything actually that I wanted to cover, and I'm aware that I've just literally talked for the whole hour and that I haven't given anybody the opportunity to ask questions. You can find my Facebook page. So I have a Facebook page, Puppy Plus. If there's anything that you want to ask after my presentation, if there's anything that you think that you'd like to ask about or get more clarification on, then feel free to contact me. I'd love to speak to you. Has anybody got any kind of like questions that they'd like to ask? I mean, I'm very aware that when I start talking, I kind of go in with that, I'm going to try to cover as much as I can and for every eventuality. And sometimes people don't have questions just purely because I talked so much. So if you have any questions before I finish, Feel free to add them into the question box. Just going to have a little peep through and make sure that I haven't missed anything. Hello, everybody who said hello to me at the beginning, who I ignored. I'm very, very sorry. My nerves are finally, I think, right at the end of the presentation, my nerves are actually starting to get a little bit more under control. Okay. Yeah, look at Baxter. I'm going to take Baxter out for a walk now. So Baxter actually, I'm just going to ramble for a few more minutes before we finish. Actually, Baxter kind of changed everything about what every oh, we got brilliant. Got some comments now. Yeah, so Baxter actually changed everything for me. He changed my career. He changed everything, every kind of preconceived idea I had about dogs. He's totally fabulous and very, very, very heavy. Okay, he says, actually, what I wanted, he said, when you were talking was just a cuddle. Okay, hi, Colette. Yeah, I really empathise with your issues. Had a similar learning journey as you with Benji. We do, don't we? And I think it's so hard, whether you've got whatever type of dog you've got, if you've got any kind of if your dog is having any kind of difficulty in social situations, it's really, really hard. And you do your best in that situation with the information that we have at that time. Okay, thank you, Keely. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I do think that Luna, interesting and encouraging. I run a rescue centre dealing with rehab and reactive dogs. I found this really informative. Yeah, reactive dogs aren't always dogs that are behaving that way through fear, or it can be just because they are just born with this huge desire to interact, and he's just pouring me now. So there's this huge desire to interact with other people and other dogs that is very difficult to manage sometimes. Okay. I actually did everything wrong that when Baxter was young. I kind of did everything wrong that I could possibly have done. And I spent the rest of his life trying to sort it out. But it's good, because it's given me a lot of empathy with clients who are struggling with that same thing. Okay. Baxter's now chewing my sleeve. Right, so I am going to disappear now, I think, because I think it's important that I leave. And I know that Carla is speaking next, and I want to go and get a cup of tea before I listen to her presentation. So thank you very much for everybody who joined us. If you're watching back, you can do #replay, because it would be great to see how many of you watch this back later. And if you have questions later, I will be checking this back. So I can answer anything else later on too. Thank you very much for listening. Okay. Bye-bye.